Hi everyone, it's Heather with Book Wild. So I am currently at my sister's helping her take care of her newborn baby. So I am kind of a hot mess, kind of all over the place. I'm sitting outside because there's a crying baby inside and it's really hot, so bear with me. That's also why Chantel and I are filming this month's wrap up together, just because with the new baby it's been like hard for us to schedule a time and we don't really like the quality of the Zoom calls anyways. So all of that to say, welcome to my August wrap up. So this month I read 12 books and I DNF'd one. So the first book that I read this month was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I did not like that book. I actually talked about this a lot in my 24-hour readathon for studying my astronomy notes, and I will link to that below because you can like go through that with me as I read it and kind of get more information on why I didn't necessarily enjoy that reading experience. It had my least favorite trope in books, which is when the narrative becomes a part of the story. Like the narrative has this like mind of its own kind of. I gave it 2 stars. I totally see why some people love it. It is really beautifully written and it is an interesting book, but it did not work for me. I am still interested in reading more from Erin Morgenstern because it was a beautiful story. I just didn't like it. And then the second book that I read this month was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This was also part of the 24-hour readathon vlog. I did enjoy this book. I gave it like 4.5 stars. Alright, the hair had to go up because I'm so warm and now I look like George Washington. The Ready Player One, so there's this virtual reality and the creator of the virtual reality has passed away and he has left this quest for people behind in his virtual reality, and so the book follows a boy named Wade and his like quest to find the Easter eggs within the virtual reality. And I really liked the quest part of it. I thought it was really fun. It was a really fast-paced book. It was good to be reading overnight for my 24-hour readathon. Like it kept me interested. I just didn't really like the character of Wade, and I also didn't love all the video game stuff. And the creator of the virtual reality, they talk a lot about like what he enjoys culture-wise, pop culture-wise, and it was all white men, and I know that that's a thing, but I don't like it. So just because of those 2 reasons, I didn't give it a 5-star, but I did enjoy reading it. And there's also a lot of social commentary, and I really liked those parts as well. The next book that I read was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. This is a non-fiction book about race relations in the UK, specifically from a black woman's perspective, and so it kind of talks about a lot of the stuff that I feel like we're more familiar with in the United States because our racial history, I think, is more, there's more discussion about race relations in America, and so I thought that the book was a great starting point for people who are just starting to learn about what systemic racism really means and why someone would feel like they no longer want to talk to some white people about race. I had a hard time connecting with the writing itself, not the subject matter, but the writing. It was just like kind of distant for me, and that's why I didn't give it 5 stars. And I also think it's for people who have read a lot on race, unless you're looking for a very specific conversation about race relations in the UK. I think this is more of a starter book. Like if you've read a lot, I wouldn't necessarily think that this would add too much more to what other books have already put out there. Next book that I read was The Spy and The Traitor by Ben McIntyre, and this is a story about a spy in the Cold War who was originally a KGB agent and turned double agent and worked for M16. And I actually didn't like this book as much as I thought that I was going to. I thought the story itself was really interesting. I love spy stories and I'm really interested in the KGB and M16, like, I mean, generally just like spy organizations and spies in general are so fascinating to me, but for some reason, again, I think it was the writing, it didn't feel super immediate. The writing style had just been just like a little different. I think it would have been like a new favorite, maybe not all-time favorite, but like a favorite of the year book. But because I had a hard time connecting with the writing, I gave it 3 stars. I do recommend it to people who are interested in the Cold War, KGB, M16 history. So the next few books are books that I am going to be talking more about in my Scallywagathon blog that I have not posted, just because there are, I mean, I'm helping with the baby, so there's like a lot going on. I haven't had time to edit. But if you want to hear more about my thoughts on the next 5 books, I will be talking more about them in that video when I post it, hopefully this week. Okay, so the first book that I read for the Scallywagathon was Anne of Green Gables. I adored this book. I thought it was super sweet. If I had read it as a child, it would have been like an all-time favorite book, but I didn't. I read it as an adult. I still gave it like 4.5 stars just because I do think it holds up really well. There are some things that, like, there's some fat shaming that would not hold up today. The discussion of adoption is not necessarily great, but other than that, I really enjoyed reading it. The next book that I read for the Scallywagathon was The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the first book in the Nevermore series, and I had conflicted feelings while reading this because I had set such high expectations for myself because I wanted it to be a new Harry Potter. I wanted it to give me all of those feelings, and it didn't. And I had a hard time separating like how I really felt reading it versus how I wanted to feel reading it. Oh god, there's a wasp. Gave it 4 stars. It's about a girl who is cursed and is blamed for everything that goes on in her community. Like if there's anything, like a cat dies or the power goes out or whatever, she's blamed. Oh, gotta wipe the sweat. And she's supposed to die on her 11th birthday, or her 12th birthday, as part of her curse. Before she dies, she's whisked away to a different society called Nevermore, and she competes in these trials to be a part of the Wondrous Society. She participates in these trials, and she's in this magical world, and she's learning, you know, how to accept herself because she's never really been shown love. She's learning to make friends and about her self-worth, and surrounded by all of this magic. And so in those ways, it is kind of like I get why people say it's Harry Potter vibes, but do not go into it thinking it will give you Harry Potter feelings, because I think it'll really lessen your enjoyment of it. It was a magical, sweet, cute story, and I'm definitely continuing the series. The only things that I didn't love was that the pacing was kind of weird. So like the book is called The Trials of Morrigan Crow, but the trials were it seemed like a small part of it, and they weren't really like very well fleshed out, and they didn't seem like that big of a deal. So that's why I gave it 4 instead of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Real Queer America, LGBT Stories from Red States by Samantha Allen. This is a nonfiction book from a trans woman reporter, Samantha Allen, and she goes to different red states to talk to members of the LGBT plus community about their experiences living in red states, and kind of it's this like argument for if you're part of the queer community, you don't need to go to New York or San Francisco to find your chosen family or your found family. You can find it within red states, and I thought the message of the book was nice. I really liked the first half of the book. I thought it gave a really great look into a trans woman's like daily life experience. Before she transitioned and came out, she was a suit wearing Mormon missionary in Utah, and that part was really interesting and gave like some perspective into her history and what that might be like. But then when she's on her road trip, I assumed that it would be more of a focus on the community members and their experiences, but it felt like it was just like a fun road trip for Samantha and her friends, and I was frustrated that we got so much of her story and like practically none of the people that she was going to interview. And I talk more about that in the Scallywagathon vlog. I had a hard time rating this because the beginning was so great, so important for people to read, and then the second half just like pissed me off a little bit, so I ended up giving it 2 stars, but that doesn't really reflect like how important I think the first half is. And I also think that if you go into it with the expectation of, okay, this is about her, not about community members, then I think you'll love it. It is so hot. The next book that I read as part of the Scallywagathon was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this book is a treat. It's about a pandemic, like a global pandemic, similar to what we have right now, but everyone dies, or like 99% of the population dies instantly or like within a few hours, so it's not really the situation that we have. And then it kind of becomes this post-apocalyptic world where there's no electricity, anything like that. And we're following a traveling Shakespeare troupe symphony that goes from town to town and brings art to people. And I thought it was really beautifully written, really poignant, if that's the right word. It was just a really great exploration of like how art affects people and brings people joy, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's not a book I would necessarily reread over and over and over and like tell every single person to read, but I really enjoyed the reading experience, and I definitely want to read more by Emily St. John Mandel because it was such a beautifully written book. And I generally don't like pandemic, post-apocalyptic books. That's just not my thing, but this was really good and I highly recommend it. Oh, the next book that I read was also, all of these books were like, it was just such a confusing reading month for me, but I read Labyrinth of the Spirits by Carlos Ruiz Zafon, and in the Scallywag... Hi, Rue. My sister's dog is coming to say hi. In the Scallywagathon vlog, you will see that I loved what I had read of this, and then the end of the week came and I like had to stop the vlog and I hadn't read all of it. I loved the first 3 quarters of this book. Like I loved it. Like I loved it. It was so interesting. It's the last book in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series, and it was like tying everything together. It was suspenseful and beautifully written, and then the last quarter of the book I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why did you do this? I do not like this. It could have ended in a way we would have been happy with, but the author continued to put the story, I guess, in a larger context, and I really didn't like the way that that happened. And there was also a situation with the main character, or with one of the main characters, that makes, you know, we love these characters, like we've loved them through a lot, and something happens and we cannot love one of them anymore. And it was such a weird choice that didn't really do a lot for the... It was just so strange. I was so I just, like, why didn't you just end it like here and we would have been good? And then you get this shit. So I don't know what I would rate this. I loved most of it, and then I hated the last part. It was so disappointing. I would still recommend you pick up the series. Just, you know, be aware that the last book's a little disappointing at the end. The next book that I read was Coraline, and when I picked this up, I thought that it was Coraline by Neil Gaiman, because it says Neil Gaiman. What I did not read was that it's a graphic novel adaptation of the national bestseller and it's adapted and illustrated by someone that's not Neil Gaiman. I think that this would be something that people who are already familiar with the story of Coraline would like, but it wasn't like fully fleshed out in the story because it was roughly the same page count as the story, but obviously, you know, was mostly illustrations, and so there was less story. And I was like, this is weird. So I think I want to read the original story and then maybe revisit this, but for what this was on its own without knowing, like if I hadn't known there was another Coraline, I would give this 3 stars. Okay, I'm gonna blast through these last ones because I'm so hot. The next book I read was Officer Clemmons by Francois Clemmons. This was another frustrating read. Clearly it's marketed as Officer Clemmons, the man who was on Mr. Rogers. That is not what this book was. This book was his memoir, Francois Clemmons' memoir. He was a gay man growing up in the South before he moved to Ohio, and his story is interesting. But the way that I feel like he wrote it was not very interesting because there's so much focus on his musical career that I did not care about. Like, I loved little snippets where he's talking about, you know, exploration of race and his sexuality, but most of it is about his music career. And it was not what I was expecting, not what I was looking for. And then when he was talking about his time on Mr. Rogers, you know, it was very brief, and he also, like, didn't really like being on Mr. Rogers, which was like, oh, okay, well, then why are you marketing this as a Mr. Rogers based memoir? And I also, again, I think I'm realizing I have a problem with self-indulgence in memoirs, and there's a difference between like talking about your life and sharing your life and your story and being self-indulgent and narcissistic. And I unfortunately found that this book was very self-indulgent and narcissistic, and I had a hard time with it for that reason, as well as just the pacing was weird. Like, you get his college career is like genuinely this much of the book, and then the last 50 pages or 50 years of his life are like this, and there's a lot of questions that are left unanswered in his life, like his sexuality. It was just very open-ended and strangely paced. So I gave this 2 stars. I forgot to mention, so I also DNF'd a book during the Scallywagathon vlog. It's White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi, and I read about 150 pages, like halfway through roughly, and I just did not like the writing style. It's a haunted house story. The main character has pica, which is where you eat chalk and mud, and to me it was a weird exploration of mental illness in a way that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. I had a hard time with the writing style. It didn't work for me. So that was the first book I've ever in my life intentionally decided to not finish. I mean, there are books that I've like set aside and forgotten about, but I intentionally decided not to finish it. But I also think that people who love more like vague lyrical writing, who are okay not really understanding what's going on, would have a better time with it. I know a lot of people really like that book. And I also think a lot of other people wouldn't find the exploration of mental illness problematic at all. So do with that what you will, but it was not for me. The last book that I read in August was When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. I was so excited to read this. I love detective stories. This is about a London detective who was born in Shanghai. When he was a child living in Shanghai, his parents disappeared. Because of that, he becomes a detective and is like a renowned detective, and his lifelong quest is basically figuring out what happened to his parents. Sorry, I know that there's a mower thing going, but we're doing our best here. But this was a weird book. I liked the writing. I was just confused by the story because it was kind of like there were all these like weird little side plot things that didn't progress I guess it kind of progressed the story, but like in a really roundabout way, and it was kind of like, okay, and then you find out what happened with his parents, and it's like, alright, not really suspenseful, because you're just like, what? So I gave this 3 stars. I don't know if I would recommend this. There might be people out there who would like absolutely adore and love this book, but for me it felt like not that. It was not that for me. Ooh, it's hot. Okay. Yeah, so I gave it 3 stars. Not the best, not the worst, not memorable. So that is my wrap up for the month of August. I read 12 books, DNF'd 1, no 5 stars. I'm hoping that September is a much better reading month. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want me to stop sweating on my videos, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one.